50 years ago, as India, an ancient civilization, constituted herself into a fledgling nation-state and ventured forth into the world, she faced unprecedented challenges. It was a bipolar world. The nations of the world were ranged in battle lines dictated by the Cold War. A nuclear holocaust seemed imminent. Empires caved in, frequently amidst conflict and bloodshed. India was to play a significant role in creating the non-aligned movement. India was not to be deterred. She decided to make her voice heard, to fashion a unique place for herself as for scores of other newly emerging countries. India's diplomacy enabled her to assume a widely recognized, if undeclared, role of leadership in what came to be known as the Third World. Not only is this preeminence of India recognized by diplomats everywhere, many of them recommend the Indian Foreign Service as a veritable model.
As Foreign Minister of Guyana, because I was Guyana's first Foreign Minister way back in 1966 and until 1975, that 10-year period, I was involved with India and Indian foreign policy and Indian diplomacy, very much in the context of a young country finding its feet in the world, finding its way in the world, and of course looking to India for a lead. And we were far away in the Caribbean, but our ties to India were very real. And our respect for India's foreign policy was profound. In fact, there's now a celebrated story in the Guyana Foreign Service that when I gave my first set of instructions to Guyana's first diplomats going out into the UN, into Washington, to London, and I said, well, this is the core of our foreign policy, which was non-alignment. We have to feel our way over the multiplicity of specific issues. And the standing instruction that I would give to you in terms of, say, voting in the UN was, when in doubt, do what India does.
I would say without any hesitation that the quality of the best Indian diplomats is as high as anything in the world. There aren't many foreign services of which I would say that. I mean, it's certainly true of the French. I like to think it's true of the British, but I'm biased, so you'd have to ask somebody else about that. But there is a great deal of talent, extremely clever, well-educated, cosmopolitan people with quick, flexible minds and very considerable grasp of what it is they're trying to do.
The Indian High Commission in London is, understandably, given the historical association with Britain, one of India's largest overseas missions. In many ways, the High Commission is representative of the structure and functioning of most diplomatic missions. At the same time, the breadth and range of activity it embraces typifies the new challenges Indian diplomacy has to face in the post-Cold War world.
Today, diplomacy itself has undergone a sea change over the centuries and over the years, especially after the Second World War. Today, it is diplomacy from government to government, diplomacy from a department of the government to another department of the government, diplomacy from people to people, diplomacy in terms of advocacy of special causes, and that I think is an extension of my profession of law. It's also economic diplomacy. It's marketing, packaging, if I may use commercial terms for diplomacy.
Come away in. Thank you. Come in. So, these are exciting times in India for us businessmen. Come, sit down. Thanks.
So what do you think of our new rules and new policy?
As chairman of BSATA, which represents UK investors and exporters to India, I have preached in every quarter I can find in India the messages of liberalization, because I have been and continue to be convinced that the only way India is going to achieve the economic growth that it's clearly capable of and which it needs.
Until the late
is through
1980s,
pursuing policies of
economic diplomacy
liberalisation
seemed
and opening up
secondary
the market.
to India's preeminent security and political preoccupations. An archaic economic dispensation at home, which emphasized self-sufficiency rather than integration with the global economy, meant that Indian diplomats could limit their economic diplomacy to obtaining aid or loans from bilateral and multilateral agencies. Though the world was sensitive to India's political and cultural importance, globally, she was perceived as not an easy place to do business with.
India and the High Commission labours under a rather old-fashioned look to it. If you go not much more than down the road, close by the St James's Hotel in London, you'll see the Hong Kong Export Council's offices. Now they are swish. They look good, they feel good, and quality comes out of that. And I guess that's what I'm talking about when I refer to a rather old-fashioned image. Bring that up to the 1990s, and with all that's happening in India today, I think it's all going to take off.
The Indian Foreign Service reaches out to foreign investors. It sensitizes them to India's potential as a marketplace, as a storehouse of skilled workforce. Equally, Indian diplomats are now required to scout for new markets for Indian products. Over the last decade, Indian diplomacy has also become more sensitive to the needs as well as the potential of the large community of non-resident Indians. Many of them have become successful businessmen overseas. All of them, without exception, wish to have a stake in the growth and prosperity of the country of their origin. The Indian High Commission is instrumental in forging this partnership by mobilizing investments from non-resident Indians. Potential investors are invited to an open house where the merits and drawbacks of various investment schemes are exhaustively presented. Their queries must be answered, their apprehension and fears set at rest. Receptions are an integral part of a diplomat's duties. They give him the chance to circulate amongst the invitees, personalize the contact with them, and take the process of exchanges forward. Contrary to what one may believe, wining and dining is hard work. The conscientious diplomat has to be on call 24 hours a day, and his function has begun to include a mind-boggling variety of tasks and duties.
I've been extremely happy with this job because if you're looking for variety, yes, it has variety. I have handled jobs right from projects involving modern steel mill modernization to the poverty alleviation project to all kinds and varieties of projects. You have got that. And being in this job, you could be a marriage officer, you could be a notary public, or you could handle political job, you could handle the commercial job and all these things, particularly in the commercial job which I'm handling at the moment. You could see that when you are involved in some either trade or the joint venture or any of this, you could see that you are involved, and you could also see that that is being implemented. That gives you enormous satisfaction.
What particularly does diplomacy have to offer? To my mind, it offers an enormous range of different things, but if I pick one out, it is the privilege of going and living, I don't mean visiting, but living, in a series of foreign countries and having the opportunity to get to know the people and the culture and the political and economic life of that country far quicker than you possibly could do if you didn't have the role of diplomat to, as it were, help you in. Now, if you're fortunate enough, as I was on a number of occasions, to serve in countries of very great interest, that is the most enormous interest and excitement.
While economics dictates the contemporary diplomatic agenda, security questions can never be neglected. The diplomat must keep his ear to the ground, as it were, pick up any indications, however slight, of attempts by India's adversaries to embarrass her.
Today's draft, I was surprised to see a couple of specimens of what we should prepare ourselves to expect. And I think we should put our heads together and decide how we are going to tackle these issues. One bit of information is that so this piece of paper which has come in, I think it's a very carefully planned effort to sabotage a perfectly harmless and non-political meeting. It was going to be attended by some of the top party leaders, and it is all set to be a highly important meeting. It just so happens that it is taking place at a time when this convention is taking place and a number of other political fringe meetings are taking place. And somebody has thought it fit to have a meeting which is very obviously directed against India, just across the road from where the Gandhi Jayanti meeting is taking place. And they're obviously trying to embarrass all the participants at the Gandhi Jayanti meeting.
The counter-strategy works at several levels: through political lobbies, through the media, through direct contact with the people affected.
From my meetings with most of the people there,
all these points. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Putting these strategies in place requires not only an interdisciplinary and coordinated approach at the mission itself, but meshing this approach with a discrete mobilization of opinion molders in a variety of spheres.
We are now planning a second. Since the days of Panditji, it was a policy not to be seen to be too closely aligned with the Indian community, because this would seem to encourage divided loyalty or give the foreign government the false notion that somehow our people are not loyal to the country of their adoption. I think after about 75 to 76, things began to change, partly because the Indian government woke up to the enormous economic and political potential of the Indian community. So since then things have begun to change. They have changed differently in different diplomatic missions. I think in Britain I would put down Kuldeep Nair as marking a turning point. Here was a man who didn't come from within the establishment, brought a certain breath of fresh air, had built up a reputation for himself as a man who would stand up to the government, had an enormous track record during emergency. As a journalist, he had access to a lot of people here. So he opened up India House, and I think Mr. Singhvi has been able to build on it and expand it even further. So these days, I would say, things are beginning to change.
An important part of the diplomat's function revolves around the projection of a positive image of India in the eyes of the public at large. The participation of the diplomat's family in these public events is not only desirable, it is often a necessary part of their success. The itinerant nature of his calling may occasionally make great demands on the peace and stability of his family life. But as a diplomat, and his near and dear ones discover soon enough, the compensations far outweigh the disadvantages.
We don't have any ideal solution to this problem because there are many plus points on both sides. We opted to keep the children with us so that they would grow up together as brothers, you know. Right. That was our main consideration. At the same time, the government does give us access to English medium schools wherever we are posted. So we hope that we would make up, you know, that we would give from the home, whatever Indianness that is to be given would be given from the home, and they would have a kind of continuity in their education. But as you know, that this is not really as simple as it seems, and it doesn't really work out that well. And it's very difficult to get continuity in education. The standards of schools are different, and Indianness doesn't come in, you know, so easily.
Our interests, mine in dance and folk dancing and basically festivals of India and things like that, that I do at home, exhibitions on India. I think they imbibe without our having to force it on them, sort of subconsciously. And I was very happy last year when I asked my son, I said, how Indian do you feel? And he said, I don't think of it directly, but whenever you do these shows, Mommy, I really feel very Indian and I feel nice. That I thought in some ways summed it up quite nicely.
I think they've had a remarkable opportunity of traveling to distant lands and meeting children from other countries, other races, and getting familiar with different cultures. I think this has been quite extraordinary and quite remarkable. And I think that the Foreign Service has been a very positive impact in their life. It has given us opportunities which we would not have had, because after all, very broadly, we do represent our country in its different aspects. And while we have a large measure of an official role to play, which we do have to do at all times, we have been able to get opportunity of reaching within ourselves, so to say, and finding creative ways of projecting our nation and our national interest. So in that sense, I think we have both together and separately really benefited a lot from the whole career span that we've had.
On a day-to-day level, the most visible public face of a diplomatic mission is its consular section. Every day, here at the Indian High Commission's consular office in London, hundreds flock for a diversity of services. Tourists, businessmen and others cluster here to obtain visas to travel to India. Work in the consular section requires a difficult combination of rigorous respect for administrative procedures and pleasant public relations. It isn't always easy, for the workload is demanding and the pressure heavy. But diplomats learn to cope with this, as they do with a welter of interviews and meetings with the media. Good media relations are fundamental to the results the diplomat obtains in the host country. These make the most exacting demands on him. What are the qualities that enable him to cope with these demands?
I'm glad to say there is no perfect model for a good diplomat. There are some important characteristics, but they can be held by very different sorts of people.
What are these characteristics?
Well, I think the first one is accuracy. You might even say honesty or intellectual honesty. If you don't get it right, everybody makes mistakes, but if you bend things because you think it's going to suit your superiors or for some other reason, then you are not doing your country a service. The most important thing is that you should be trusted. You should be trusted at home, you should be trusted by the people you talk to. If you're not trusted, you're not worth your salary. A second point is that you've got to have stamina. Diplomatic life is tough. And it's tough not only on the diplomat doing what he's doing during the day, but it's tough on his family too. And that can produce psychological stresses for the diplomat as well as for his family. So stamina is crucial. Not very glamorous, but crucial. Then I think that a certain amount of intellectual curiosity is very important, because you go around from one place to another, and also one type of job to another. I mean, it's always going, for example, from Delhi to New York. It amazed me in some ways that my paycheck came from the same source. I mean, the jobs were so totally different.
It's at the coal face that the real work is done. It's at the level of the ambassadors and the first secretaries and the second secretaries, the people working away in the institutions, in the negotiations, in the small groups, where increasingly diplomacy takes place. The world has moved on from the days of Krishna Menon, when what mattered was the great speech in the General Assembly. What is as important now, the great speeches are still important, but what matters very much is the serious professional work. As a foreign minister, as Commonwealth Secretary General for so long, I have a great respect for the professionalism of diplomacy.
Diplomacy is an unrelenting, endless call of duty, where one has to perform every instant of the day. It can be tiring and often keeps one away from one's homeland for long stretches of time. Yet to the sensitive individual, as to his family, there can be many compensations. Living in different lands, meeting and befriending a bewildering variety of people, all of these play an important part in nurturing one's sensibilities. Not surprisingly, many diplomats are also creative people.
पाँव में है परदेश की बेड़ी, ज़हन में गूंजे देश की याद, दूरी का एहसास है हर पल, दिल में सुलगे देश की याद. These lines come like this. तुझको छोड़ के पछताता हूँ, अपने आप से घबराता हूँ, दो तहजीबों में पलता हूँ, अपनी आग में खुद जलता हूँ, पाँव में है परदेश की बेड़ी, जहन में गूंजे देश की याद, दूरी का एहसास है हर पल, दिल में सुलगे देश की याद. So this is the condition of a mind of an every expatriate abroad. Poetry has lived with me for years, so it was nothing new to me. It remained dormant feeling. Until I reached Doha, Qatar, in the Gulf, I had no occasion to interact with the people who could appreciate Urdu poetry. We found a large number of Indian community and some of the local Qataris who understood Urdu, and we started with the Urdu Symposium, Mushairas. That's the occasion where it started, and it flowed more like a stream. It just came out. I was able to.
The necessity as a Foreign Service officer to get under the skin of the country and to get to know people within the country, that is not diplomats, but for example, Egyptians in Cairo, where I live. That is of enormous advantage because particularly I can only talk at first hand about the country I've been living in for the last 2 years. I mean, to try and get into the stream of Egyptian culture and modern history and their politics, all of which is very necessary from the professional point of view. It works at the same time, but in a completely different way, as a source of tremendous enrichment for anyone who wants to write, because it's the juxtaposition of two cultures and two peoples and well, just widening of experience, something completely new. I mean, I thought in the beginning that Egypt is a lot like India. I mean, the same chaos, the same confusion, the same warmth and sentimentality and so on. But when you get to know it better, which I would not have been able to do had I not been living there, you find it is Arab, it is Coptic, it is Pharaonic, it is so many layers, and that's fascinating as a writer.
But nothing, not even personal accomplishments in the arts, pleases the diplomat as much as a job well done. The Indian diplomat never allows himself or herself to lose sight of the fact that his primary function is to promote India's partnership with the world, a partnership in development, a partnership in growth and prosperity for both India and the host country.
The rewards are first and foremost when you see that you are moving something in the right direction. Secondly, when you get the intellectual excitement. I mean, for example, I was with a very distinguished American ambassador when he was told that he was going back to be ambassador in Moscow for the second time. The president personally rang him up, and I happened to be there. And he said yes, he would go, and how exciting this was. But then he turned and said, the conversation we've been having, which was about anti-ballistic missiles, strangely, was intellectually the most exciting of his career. You never know what it's going to be, but it can be very exciting when you've got a new problem, thinking out what really matters.
In 1945, when they created the United Nations, back in the days when people like Nehru so greatly inspired the developing world, the emerging world, in playing a role and giving a lead in shaping the world. In those days, the great issue was security. How are we going to remove the scourge of war? And we can spend a lot of time talking about the failures over all those years. As we turn into the next millennium, as we turn into the next century, it isn't so much, I believe, the scourge of war, but the scourge of poverty, the scourge of disparity in the world, the overconsumption of the rich, the underconsumption of the poor. That is, in effect, leading us to a degraded environment that is life-threatening for rich and poor alike. It's a new kind of issue and a new kind of challenge, and it is a challenge for diplomats, because we have to forge patterns of partnership out of international negotiation if we are to save ourselves. I can't think of anything a young Indian can do better than be committed to that kind of life.